1 second. Oh, okay, very good. After seeing, a Nazarite is after they see a sota in their state of destruction, the Torah says they should. The commentaries say that the reason why these two individuals are juxtaposed is because if a person sees a sota in their destruction, then they should become a Nazarite, and that essentially means a sota is a woman who has been suspected by her husband of violating their marriage. And she has to go through a certain process where she gets tested by these divine waters. And if, in fact, she's guilty, she actually dies from the water. So if someone actually experienced watching that or seeing that, which would be very, very unusual and rare, then they should distance themselves. They should become a Nazarite. A Nazarite is a person who makes a vow that I will be a Nazarite. And a Nazarite has three prohibitions. Three prohibitions that one accepts upon themselves by becoming a Nazarite. One is that they cannot drink wine or any grape juice, anything from the grapes. They cannot become impure to a dead body. That means they cannot attend a funeral, and they cannot cut their hair. It's a way of a person elevating themselves from impurity, and also the idea of wine is to elevate themselves from an element which leads a person to diminish their inhibitions and their discipline. And that's the reason why we know that when people are drunk, they often do things that they regret for the rest of their life, because you're taking a very big risk when you are removing your inhibitions. You better know yourself very well before you do something like that. So when they see that a woman misbehaved in such a manner that she violated her relationship with her husband, which is pretty severe, obviously, then, and often that includes or involves, as the Talmud elaborates, that very often involves wine. So therefore, he should separate himself from wine and things that can lead to such behavior. But here's the fascinating thing: is that the Torah says these words. This is how the parsha, this section about this of the Nazarite begins. Ish o isha, a man or a woman, ki yafli lindar neder nazir laHashem. Ki yafli. So the word yafli is an unusual word, and the commentary scrambled to explain what does this word yafli mean, and there are a number of explanations. But yafli simply, if you read a translation in many of the translated chumashim, it says when a person separates himself. But the word yafli actually comes from the word pele, and pele is a wonder or a wondrous event. We like you may know, le'osa niflaos. The root of niflaos is pele, which is the word yafli, that God creates wonders. The reason why a wonder and a separation are similar or have the same root is because a wonder is an event which is distinct and separate from your average occurrences. Whereas, so it's separated. And therefore, we use the word yafli, a wonder, to also indicate when someone separates themselves from certain things by taking a vow to be a Nazarite. But there's another a beautiful element to this, and that is in understanding separation and wonder sharing the very same word. In addition to the fact that at the root of what a wondrous thing is that it is separated from the norm, but there's something even more profound, and that is that when an individual finds the strength to separate themselves from something that can lead them down the wrong path, which is essentially building a fence to protect myself so I don't succumb to the weaknesses that I know I have, God says this is a pele. It's a wondrous achievement. It's a wondrous achievement. And this aligns beautifully with what the Alter Rebbe tells us, that every time a person practices or expresses an act of iskafia, of self-control, of controlling our animalistic self, that this draws down an unbelievably powerful divine light into the world. because whenever we do that, it is a wondrous achievement. Sometimes we ourselves, I would say very often, we ourselves do not appreciate what we do. And somebody say, yeah, well, I have this temptation, I have this desire, it's out of control. Thank God I was able to control it. It's not just thank God I was able to control it. It's an unbelievable human achievement to control our humanity by overriding it and being greater than just being a human. To be greater than being human, because human is to live an instinctive life, to just live a life where you pursue the things that you want. Why shouldn't I pursue the things that I like? But when we are committed to something higher, or we identify with a part of ourselves which is deeper than just me, which is our divine soul, then we perform these wondrous acts. And there's another fascinating thing, that when a person is living their life in dedication and commitment to a deeper value, so what happens is we end up being exactly what God asks of us to be. And that is that God says, I put you into the world, but I want you to live in the world without becoming a part of the world. Meaning, I don't want you to be consumed in the world that you live in. I want you to be in the world, but above the world at the same time, which sounds really like a contradiction. However, when we control our desires, ourself, for a higher purpose, that is exactly what we're doing. We are operating in the world, but our operating in the world is not in a way that we are consumed in the world, but that we actually bring something to the world, or we elevate the world. And we carry this contradiction of being human beings, being physical beings, and yet bringing an element to the physicality and to the humanity, which is higher than. And that's a wondrous achievement. That is somewhat of a contradiction that we have to carry, and is a unique mission given to the Jewish people. It's given to every human being on some level, but to the Jewish people it was given in a very, very strong way. That's why we have 613 commandments. And this is what the well-known story with the great Hasidic master. There was a great Hasidic master who lived about 200 years ago by the name of Reb Meir of Premishlan. He was a very holy man. There are certain people in the world who are godly people. They're very rare. But when I say godly, I mean that they are almost completely godly people in the way they operate. That they're literally aligned with God in such a deep and profound way. And you can see it clearly because they operate in a very different way than the average person does. So Reb Meir of Premishlan was one of these people. And by way of example, I'll just demonstrate this to you, and you can tell me if there's anyone in our conversation. We have 25 people here. If any single one of us has the ability to do this, and you can do it, actually, theoretically. I'm not doing it, but if you want, you can do it. Reb Meir Premishlan did it. He never went to sleep at night if there was any money in his house. Now, there were no banks then, so it wasn't as if he had the money in a bank account. The bank was your mattress. He would not go to sleep with a coin in his house. If God gave him a coin that day and he had the food that he ate, he made sure to give that money to a poor person. Oh, what about tomorrow? What about tomorrow? So it's tomorrow, God will give me for tomorrow. Now, the truth of the matter is I wouldn't advise you to do this. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why you should not do this. Because a guy could say, it sounds really interesting. If it worked for Meir Premishlan and he lived X amount of years and it worked for him, it must work for me too. I'm going to do it. But the reason why I would not advise you to do this is because you have to genuinely trust God the way Reb Meir Premishlan did. But if you don't trust God the way Reb Meir Premishlan did, it ain't going to work. So because we're not on that level. And that's the point I'm just trying to bring out, is that there are certain people who God gifted with a vibrant soul that's on fire, and that doesn't get as consumed as we are, or as lost as we are in our bodies. And so they have a special role to play. And thank God he lived up to it. So this is the great man of Meir Premishlan. And there's a well-known story that's repeated very often about him. In order for him to go to the mikveh, because a Hasidic Rebbe for sure, and a Hasidic Jew strives to go to the mikveh every single day. because it adds spiritual purity, even though it's not an obligation to, but it adds spiritual purity to a person when they do. And why do you need extra spiritual purity? It helps. It gives us it gives us support from above in being able to be more aligned with godliness, because we are in a more pure state. That's the reason why. So he would go every single day to the mikveh, and the mikveh was you had to climb over a hill and back down the hill to get to the mikveh from the location where he lived. And one day in the winter, that could be very dangerous, because in the winter in Russia, it was very cold, and it would be very icy, the hill. But somehow Reb Meir Premer, even though he was not an athletic person, and he didn't do mountain climbing as his hobby, but he would go up the mountain and down the mountain, and somehow, even when it was very icy and really truly dangerous, he'd get up and go down. So and people would say, this shows you the greatness of Reb Meir Premer. He's a godly man. That he does something that's really, it's not possible to do, but somehow he manages to do it. So once there were a bunch of hoodlums, as there always are, Jewish hoodlums, and they said, and they didn't believe in all of the Hasidic stuff and even the religious stuff. You know, they were just, and they would mock it. And they said, "What, you're making such a big deal? We'll show you." And then they will show you. And these guys were far more athletic than Reb Meir Premer was, and they'll all climb up the mountain, the hill, and down the hill, and say it's all good. So they started climbing up the mountain, and the hill was really, really icy. And as they started getting higher and higher, it was slipperier and slipperier, and they all came sliding down, black and blue marks, banged up, terrible. So they were humbled by this experience. So they went to Reb Meir Premer and they said, "Rabbi, please tell us, in fact, how you do it. We see it's really not realistic at all to be able to climb up such a hill when it's so icy." See, he said, "As men is verbunden oben, fällt man nicht unten." If one is connected above, then you don't fall below. It's almost like I envision, when I hear this, I envision a rope from heaven that's tied to it's like when you go on these obstacle courses, they have a secure line for you, right? So attached to the back of his pants, and he can't fall. He simply can't fall. But in a certain respect, that would be a physical vision of exactly what he was saying, that he literally couldn't fall because he was connected above, so he doesn't fall down here below. He wouldn't fall. And this is the idea of us making ourselves holier people, that what ends up happening is Hashem gives us the support when we are willing to build fences and make efforts to say, look, I am predisposed, my character is weak, and my personality as God made me is weak in certain areas, and we all have that. And we all need to firstly be self-aware of that and acknowledge it and be honest about it. That itself is a big achievement. And once we have to say, what can I do to get myself, rein myself in, and get myself in control? And once we can, God then supports us in the very same way that God supported Reb Meir Premer when you go to the mikveh. And this is also expressed in the idea that when a person takes a vow to be a Nazirite, so classically, if you just say I'm a Nazirite, how long does this obligation last for? This commitment lasts for? So classically, 30 days. However, if a person doesn't give a time, but if a person does give a time, they say, I want to be a Nazirite for 48 days. So they're a Nazirite for the exact time that they decide that they want to be a Nazirite. Each person to themselves can be a Nazirite for the length that they actually verbalize. Why is that so? Because every person hopefully knows themselves, and everyone needs a different level of restriction. So therefore, it leaves it open for every single person to decide to determine how long they need to have this fence in place to protect them. And this teaches us a very profound lesson. When I was by my conference, our annual Shliach conference. It was about 4 or 5 months ago. So I'll tell you a little incident that struck me. It actually stayed by me, and it's just coming to me right now. It's a room full of rabbis, right? Because of their workshops. So we were in workshops. So they have like maybe, 15 workshops going at one time. You have thousands of rabbis there, and you have all the rabbis sitting in workshops. So I was sitting there in the workshop next to another rabbi who I know. He's a few years older than me, and we were sitting next to each other. And the next speaker walked in. The next speaker is a very special person. I happen to know and also appreciate and learn a lot from. He's a very special person, very profound and extremely helpful to people in many, many ways. Some of you may know, may have come across him. He's not from the most prolific, but he's getting there actually. And he happens to be a little bit overweight. Okay, fine. So he walks in, and this other rabbi comments to me. I'm giving you inside lashon hara about rabbis. I probably shouldn't share this, but I also have this need also to always remind you that rabbis are human beings. So even though we hope that they will be great examples for us, but then this is the exact point I want to make now. Everyone has their weakness. So this rabbi said, how can you get up and speak to people about values when you look like that? That's what the rabbi sitting next to me said. It was a very judgmental statement. Granted, I've made plenty of judgmental statements in my life as well. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. I understood, and I happen to know that this rabbi, actually exercises. So he's into that. He's into taking care of himself. I'm talking about the rabbi who made the judgmental comment. That's why he was judgmental about the other guy, because we always take our virtue and point it out to the guy to whom it's a weakness. And that's the point. That is the point. The point is, I'm almost 100% sure that that this rabbi who's overweight has a weakness with food, a strong weakness with food. Like I have a weakness with other things, which I'm not going to share with you. Right? I don't need to advertise those things, but I am very well aware of the fact that I have certain things that I am very weak with and are out of control. They just may not show as much. That just may be what it is. Just may not show as much. So maybe I come across as I have a better impression, but that doesn't change anything. Or this rabbi who made the judgmental comment, maybe he looks better because he's thinner, because his food is in control. But what about some other areas in your life? So comes the Torah and tells us everyone's got their challenge and everyone's got to deal with their challenge. Your job is not to deal with someone else's challenge. The Torah doesn't come and tell you how long you should be a Nazirite. It leaves it up to you to figure it out. It leaves it up to the next person to figure it out. In other words, everyone needs to decide what they need to control, and that's their job. It's not my job, though, to tell this person what he needs to control. When it comes to the other person, what I need to tell them is, or my perspective towards them is, in understanding that I've got areas out of control. I get it, boy. I get it 100%. Right? And actually, it took me it took me some maturity to myself appreciate. First of all, people have different metabolisms, and also, I'm now Baruch Hashem 46 years old. When I was 35, I had no understanding of what happens to your body when you hit 40. And I had no understanding of the effort it takes to lose a single pound at that age. So it's easy to be at 35 and judge a guy at 45, right? So it's the humility to stop staying in that judgment, but to actually be able to look at another person and give them space in their struggle. And the moment we start judging them, turn that judgment right around to ourselves and say, whoa. You're quick to judge him. Turn that around. What do you have out of control? And you be a Nazirite for yourself. Don't be a Nazirite for another person. So these are the profound lessons that we learn from a Nazir, to take responsibility for our weaknesses, to install, if you will, protection, so that we don't become vulnerable by being exposed to the opportunity of those weaknesses, and to make sure that we're focusing on ourselves and that we're not focusing on another. And I hope that we can all do our best to implement that in our personal lives, because if you want to know what's going to make this world a better place, this is what's going to make the world a better place. And so, and I'm gonna, we'll go a little bit further, and to make this very political. But I think it's moral. It's what we stand for. A little bit political and relevant to what's going on now in our country, where we have. And please send me messages if I'm out of bounds here, or if I'm if I'm saying something inappropriate or you vehemently disagree, which was very likely. I know I'm walking into a little bit of hot water over here, but I feel that this is so fundamental. We're watching people, and this is, by the way, I don't know the exact intentions of everyone here, but so I am applying some of my judgment on why people are doing what they're doing. We're watching people torch down cities. It's unbelievable. I'm not even commenting about the people. I'm not so bothered, to be honest with you. I'm not as bothered by the people who are creating the havoc. For better or for worse, and I'm not justifying in any way or giving them a free pass, but I'm not surprised. I am not surprised that this element of society, right? And it's not a single demographic, although it may be a majority of a demographic, which we have to be open and honest about acknowledging. We can't put our heads in the sand. But whatever the details are, I'm not surprised. Okay, why am I not surprised? Because these people, when they are given free rein, unfortunately, we have an element in society, which we know, which everyone knows, which will do these things. What bothers me far more are the authorities or the representatives of the state, if you will, and I don't mean the police, who are not exercising strength to protect the part of society that actually is responsible and actually does care about the betterment of society, and instead are giving free rein to the people who could care less about society for whatever reason it is. And so, and by thinking that by appeasing this element which is out of control, then we are going to then fix the problems. What we're actually doing is aggravating the very people who we need to have a civil society, which are the civil people, and giving free rein instead of controlling the people who are out of control, which that's all we need. All we need is control. And now, unfortunately, I'm not a big believer in control, as you know. I'm a big believer in influence. But when things are dangerous, you must exercise at that time control. And whatever those measures may be, which I don't need, which are obvious and well known, and I don't need to comment on them, that is a responsibility of a mayor of a city, whatever city it may be, to protect people who have worked for years and years to build a business, that it not be torched to the ground, because those are the people who serve our society and build our society. And when we kick the can down the road by appeasing, appeasing aggressors, and this is what I shared a little bit in our Tanya class, by appeasing aggressors, and this is the exact same. These issues are all the same when you get to the core of them. It's the exact same issue going on between Israel and the Palestinians. When you appease aggressors, what you end up doing is twofold damage. You embolden the aggressors and you weaken the people who are the most reliable and responsible people. That is wrong. It's unjust. It's unfair. And what the Nazir and the Torah throughout, what the Nazir teaches us is we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And when we have people who take responsibility for themselves, that is the greatest asset that we have to society. And when we weaken or we show, and this is what's happening, we're showing people that social distancing is very important until a mob comes, of rioters come, and then social distancing is not very important. And because we're going to let them go to express themselves, and that you need to keep your store shut down and not to be opened, which I'm not necessarily arguing with, I don't know, but surely it's not to leave my store closed down for someone else to torch and destroy. And surely if we're concerned about social distancing, or we're not that concerned after all, then maybe my business could be open so I can actually support my family. These are the contradictions that are going on, which are very troubling. And I know that they are, I'm stepping into politics, but I'm saying this for this reason, because one of the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit is that a person needs to lead a responsible life. That we don't support victimhood, we support responsibility. And even though there are people who are victims, and we need to address, without a question, we need to address when people who are representatives of the state, such as the police force, and I don't think this is widely rampant, but it does happen, unfortunately, more than it should, when they do take the life of someone, which is devastating, absolutely devastating. What happened to this guy, Floyd? I don't care what he did and how many times he sat in prison. The fact that he was killed by a police officer is terrible and must be addressed in the strongest measure, assuming that we have the facts of the story. It must be addressed in the strongest measure without a question. But that doesn't justify wild people who really have nothing to do with Floyd and have nothing to do with arguing his case. They have to do with just vandalizing and ransacking stores, that we have to stand up and with strength and protect those who are the most important people in our society, and let these people know that this is not the way a society is built. So those are, and we learn this from almost every step in the Torah. We learned it from the Nazarite about taking responsibility. We learned it from the Sotah. We learned it from almost every law in the Torah is to be a responsible person. It's not about me making sure you're going to be responsible. It's about me making sure I'm going to be responsible. And that's what business owners do. They take responsibility for their life. And this is just, and this core of the more we support victimhood, instead of supporting responsibility, the weaker we make our societies, the weaker we make the world. And we have to speak this openly. And I'm doing this, even though I know it's controversial, I'm doing this because I believe that this is a fundamental value that needs to be spoken. And even though some people are going to be upset that I spoke this way and I said this, whatever, I think there are certain messages that must be said. And the results of this message not being repeated often enough is what is going on the street today. And that the politicians are more scared of people who believe in victimhood than they are scared of people who believe in responsibility. And that's why I'm voicing this opinion, so that we should all be emboldened to voice this opinion. And the politicians should know what's going to happen. We all know when this all dies down, God willing, very, very soon, is that the havoc that so many people are going to deal with. It's bad enough that we're dealing with the coronavirus, which is an act of God. But now we're dealing with something that we can control in a much greater fashion, which is not being controlled. And we're appeasing people now. And tomorrow we're going to have the responsible members of society who are now going to come knocking on the doors of the politicians and saying, "Where were you?" And I think I made my case. And the way we do this, I just want to conclude with this. The way we achieve this ultimately as a society is by every one of us taking responsibility for our lives. And that as every day goes on, there are fewer and fewer times that we blame someone for what's happening in my life, but rather we take responsibility for what we're looking for in our life. That's how we create, by every one at a time, we make this a more powerful world by having more responsible people. All right, thank you for sitting through that. And all right, no one threw any eggs at me. It's great. Zoom is a great thing. No eggs, no tomatoes. I will unmute, and you can please share whatever you'd like to say.
I don't think you're going to get any arguments, Rabbi.
What's that?
I don't think you're going to get any arguments from the people you're talking to.
I